This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, my guest today, Kit Steinkellner, is best known as creator and executive producer of the Facebook original series Sorry for Your Loss, starring Elizabeth Olsen. The Hollywood Reporter reviewer Daniel Feinberg called it flawless top-tier television. Kit is currently attached to adapt Quince into a feature for Netflix. Quince is Kit's debut graphic novel, which won a gold medal in 2018 at the Independent Publishers Book Awards for Best Graphic Novel or Drawn Book. Kit is also developing features for Lionsgate and Sony and a pilot for FX. For the record, Kit and I have known one another since our days at UCLA in the graduate program in screenwriting. On top of that, she also happens to be the daughter of two of my favorite past StoryBeat guests, Cheri and Bill Steinkellner. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm truly thrilled to have one of the best writers working in today's Hollywood, Kit Steinkellner, on StoryBeat today. Kit, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, trust me, it's my pleasure. All right, so let's go back a bit. What were your earliest influences? I assume your parents were your earliest influences, but in terms of being a creator and a writer, where did this all start for you?
Yeah, sure. Look, I was not like a flashy razzle-dazzle kid. I remember being in school and seeing kids that were great at sports or great singers or dancers. And I wasn't like flashy and impressive any of those ways, but I loved reading books and I loved watching TV and I loved watching movies. And so, I read everything in the library. I watched a lot of old movies, a lot of Nick at Night. When I was in high school, I started writing plays, and my dad got maybe you remember these. They used to publish the best American plays every year from like the 1940s to the 80s. They published like 10 in like a huge volume for every year.
Right.
And so my dad got like, I want to say 20 or 30 of those volumes, and I read them all over the course of a summer. So I read a lot of plays from like the 30s through the 80s at a formative age while I was watching a lot of like AMC and TCM in high school. I used to joke that I had an ancient ear as a writer. I felt like my dialogue sounded very old fashioned for a while. So I was kind of steeped in things that were at least 30 years old, if not older. But that's kind of, I don't know, that's kind of like childhood and high school, what I was just diving into, but kind of like anything I could get my hands on, specifically like I think character-based stuff. I think like I fell pretty hard for Cameron Crowe and Billy Wilder in high school. When I was specifically with theater, I was like eyeballs deep in Tennessee Williams.
You're an old soul then. You gravitate toward the older stuff, which, by the way, I've been teaching for a number of years here in Pittsburgh, and most of my students have no idea who anyone is beyond about 8-9 years ago. So the fact that you were studying that already tells me that you were deeply into history of entertainment.
Well, yeah, and look, I just had yes, and I aimed high, and I wanted to know what was considered to be like the quote unquote best. Now I have a more nuanced view of that. I understand that whatever won the Academy Award in 1975 isn't necessarily the best movie.
Sure.
I used to think like whatever won the Pulitzer, the Academy Award, or the whatever was, and that does mean something, but doesn't mean everything. So I think I have a more nuanced layered view of that. But I think at the time I just wanted to know, I wanted to be as good as I could be, and I want to know what was out there that was as good as good as a thing can be.
Were you writing as a kid? Were you always coming up with stories?
I think I was it was serious. I don't think I was always writing. I do remember, this is very embarrassing. I read Gone with the Wind, and I ended up writing some Gone with the Wind fan fiction, which is very embarrassing. But I was like, I think I was 10 or 11, and look, I have a more complicated view of that book now. I think it's it's very hard to reread because of how racist it is.
Yes.
But at the time, I didn't have that lens, and so. But anyway, I was kind of too young to imagine at 10, 11 to imagine myself as like the heroine of my own story or a romantic interest. But I was really I gravitated toward those stories, and so this is so embarrassing. But I wrote this fan fiction in which it was like when Scarlett and Rhett mid novel have broken up, and like I would like. I was a character in this fan fiction. Like I'd be like crossing the Mason-Dixon line, trying to get them back together. So I wrote like a bunch. So I think I wanted to, I think I had the impulse, but not the confidence. Like I definitely wasn't like writing my own stuff. I think I tried to write a novel like in 7th grade. Like I think I took like weird.
In the 7th grade, you tried to write a novel?
The summer between 7th and 8th grade, I think I thought my life was very interesting. And again, I loved reading books. I think it's hard to love a thing as much as I loved books and not try your hand at it. So anyway, I think writing came out like in all kinds of weird ways until high school. I got really lucky. My theater teacher offered a playwriting class, and it was a public high school. So it was just like one period a day. It was kind of like, a glorified independent study. You just kind of met one period a day and read a bunch of plays and had to write one by the end of the year. But that was the first time I think everything kind of like focused and coalesced. And I really fell in love with writing plays in a big way.
I think that's, I'm sure there are many high schools in which kids write plays, but I suspect it's not that widespread. And that for the fact that you were doing that is, that put you ahead of the curve for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's become, I mean, it's still not like in every high school thing. It's not like basketball, or even cheerleading, but I think there are more high schools are offering those kinds of opportunities.
Sure.
Because there are contests and festivals for teens, which I got into when I was a kid, or when I was a teen rather. But yeah, I got lucky, and I had a lot of smart classmates, and I like we were talking about, I was just reading every play I could get my hands on and just trying to figure out. I mean, I think I pride myself. I think I had good taste back then. I think I still do. I've heard sometimes like when you're beginning to write compared to like when you're beginning to draw, like your stick figure person doesn't resemble like an actual human at all, or barely resembles it. Like but you know what a human looks like, so you're just trying to get your hand to be as smart as your eye.
Sure.
And that's definitely how I felt. I mean, still how I feel to an extent, but it's it was. I think I had an eye back then, and I feel like I knew what was good, and I knew where I wanted to go and who I wanted to be.
At what point? Well, because obviously it took a while before you became a professional writer. But at what point in this process, was it at UCLA? Was it before? Was it after? Where you thought to yourself, you know what, I am actually pretty good at this, and this is something I really want to focus on and do. Was it early?
Yeah, it was kind of a sandwich, because I think I was a little bit of a wunderkind as like a teenager in my early 20s, like in high school and college. I kind of did. I won all the things there were to win. Like right. I was kind of like a big fish in that small teen pond. There's only so many contests and festivals, and I did them all. I placed in them all, and then I got into my 20s and was then the tiniest fish in the biggest pond, and so I then lost all confidence and spent a decade plus kind of figuring out how to be a writer again. But I definitely but it was nice to have like a few years where I felt like I was on top of the world. Like that was I never forgot that feeling. It was great.
So I think I don't want to dwell at all on your parents.
You're fine.
But I think it's important to ask the question, since you grew up with writers as your parents, I assume that was a major influence for you, that you saw how they operated, how they worked, what their day was like, what they were talking about and thinking. I'm assuming that was influential on you, yes?
Yeah, it was. I think it's not in the way people often assume. I think people often assume like it made me feel like I could do it, and I guess to an extent it did. But I think sometimes I think people assume if your parents are writers, specifically TV and film writers,
Yeah.
that you know everything and you just like have no more questions. And in fact, I had like 1,000 questions. I definitely, I didn't feel like I knew everything, but a few things to answer your question. What it did was it definitely made me feel like it was possible.
Right.
Versus I think if, because I saw them, working on project after project, it was an attainable thing. And I also saw how hard they worked and how frustrating and disappointing things could be sometimes, and just how resilient they were, and what patience and perseverance looks like in a professional setting. And so I think one of the things I pride myself most on is my work ethic. It's pretty damn good, and I feel like that's because of Bill and Cheri. Absolutely. Because I don't look at any kind of disappointment or setback or failure as the end of the line. I just look at it as, a moment in time that I have to recalibrate from and figure out.
That is such an important lesson. It's important for listeners to hear what Kit just said, which is that there are going to be setbacks in your career. There's no doubt of that. And you're going to write things and things aren't going to work. And you're going to have to figure out how to either revise them or abandon them or whatever it is you're going to do ultimately. And without that conscious understanding of it, people sometimes get frustrated and give up.
Yeah. And I would also say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go right ahead.
I would also say there are going to be moments potentially for you, there certainly were for me, where things could not have looked more glamorous on the outside. Like I think people could not have thought I was doing better professionally, and I was really flailing or struggling. So sometimes things look great, or you kind of look like you're at a career high, and you may be in some ways, but you can still be having a tough time professionally, or having a great time professionally and having a tough time personally. So well,
it's the old thing that most people don't understand, that when you watch a Fred Astaire movie and he does all those very graceful, cool moves that he makes, that he didn't just wake up that morning and do them. He spent hours and hours and hours, if not hundreds of hours, working it out so that it looked smooth and cool. Yeah. It's the same for writing. You have to really work at it. All right. So at what point did you get your first gig in Hollywood?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Well, I will not give too many identifying details on this, but there was, I was hired to, several years ago, like I would say maybe like my mid-ish 20s, I was hired to write a screenplay that I signed a contract. It went through my agent, never got paid for it, and actually had to file a lawsuit. I won the lawsuit, and I still never got paid for it. So that was technically my first gig, but it did not work out. But my first,
you had an instant baptism by fire just in that case.
Well, the funny thing was I'd been really like hustling and struggling for, not struggling, but just really hustling and pounding the pavement in the years leading after that. So it really felt like, I finally got an open writing assignment. I'm finally, going to be a screenwriter. And yeah, it was a real bummer. It was, look, there are sociopaths in Hollywood. And there's sociopaths in every industry, but I certainly worked for one. I worked for a few, actually.
Don't spoil my illusion. 35 years in Hollywood, I bumped into a few of mine. I've been down the road you're talking about, where somebody doesn't pay you and all that. I've experienced all that. And we're not going to talk about my career for sure, but I'm saying that, if you're thinking about going into the business of Hollywood, and as a writer, director, actor, almost doesn't matter, you're gonna bump into some characters at some point. It's just inevitable. That's just the business.
Yes, I mean, like usually you probably get paid, but there are some real horror stories.
Indeed.
But my first gig that like I got paid for, and it was like above board, was I staffed on a television show. I staffed on an Amazon show called Z: The Beginning of Everything. That was about Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, specifically focusing on Zelda Fitzgerald. Christina Ricci played Zelda. Right. And I guess that was 4 years ago that I staffed on that.
So out of UCLA, it took you a couple of years to get to the point where you were actually working and being paid.
Yeah, I think it was 6 or 7.
Yeah. So again, I want everyone that's listening to this show to understand that Kit, who was gifted early in life and who remains quite gifted, it took her a while to pound the pavement, as she says. And this is just the nature of that beast. It usually doesn't happen overnight. And when people are overnight successes, it's usually 10 years in the making, you know?
Absolutely. I think 10 years is a very reasonable amount of time to
Sure.
spend in Hollywood before you, I guess, quote unquote, make it. And also I will add, there are some people, I can think of a few examples of friends that were wunderkinds in their early mid-20s and just like kept selling pilots. I had two friends in particular. I was like, oh my God, you're in fourth position on something. This is and I'm like tutoring. Like, this is like crazy. And I was grateful for my tutoring gig, but like I did feel lesser than those people. And like sort of the arc of your career can be an interesting thing in that then I had my own show for a couple of years. And I think those friends ended up kind of looking at my career with envy, whereas 5-7 years earlier, I'd been so envious of them. So it's a bit of a roller coaster, and we're all at highs and lows at different moments.
I think, unfortunately, the business actually generates those feelings where people seem to be in positions of one stature or another. And I think at the end of the day, this is now I'm talking from a longer view because I'm much older than you. And the longer view from my perspective is it's a marathon and not a sprint, and that you are attempting to turn out work, whether you're positioned higher than someone or not. It's more important that you do the work and that you keep turning out excellent work.
Oh, I could not agree more. I had and this was before I had staffed, I sort of had this paradigm shift where for a long time, I thought, I really placed my value externally. I thought, well, okay, I'll have value and worth as a person as soon as I staff or sell something or I'm working and legitimate. And I was so miserable. Like I just felt so badly in the meantime that I had to completely switch my thinking around. And once I started thinking of, to your point, my work as being the end all be all and making the most valuable contribution I could make, like that being the brass ring versus any one job or
Sure.
external win, it changed everything for me. And I liked myself a lot better. First of all, I stopped resenting and being envious of friends, which I didn't feel good about at the time anyway.
It's not a useful thing to feel.
Yeah,
It doesn't help you.
It felt wrong. I didn't feel like who I was or who I wanted to be. But as long as I placed value in those external buckets, that's just it was sort of a byproduct of that. But once I just started looking at any given pilot, screenplay, whatever I was working on as like, my job isn't to sell this. My job is to make this as beautiful as it can be.
Right.
First of all, I was a lot happier. And I just and I think my work was better. And I think I just became a better human overall. So I could not agree with you more in that regard.
So, all right. So you really started as a playwright. I mean, you were writing plays early on, and you've had plays produced in Los Angeles.
I have, yeah.
And so do you still think of yourself as a playwright, or do you think of yourself more now as a writer for the screen?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a play go up last year in Los Angeles. It was at the time I said yes to this theater company between season 1 and season 2 of the show, not knowing we were going to get a season 2.
Right.
And the way the timing worked out, the week that play opened was the first week of production for season 2, which was a crazy week of my life. But I asked myself that question every day, especially when I was getting like 2-3 hours of sleep. I was like, I'm trying to be a playwright and a creator showrunner right now. Like, what am I doing? It's interesting. I feel I do love plays, and I also feel, well, right now we're all stuck at home, so it's not, this is kind of a moot point, but like in a more normal moment, it's hard to get people off their couch in their car to go see your play.
Sure.
And so, Paula Vogel says theater, I'm paraphrasing, but theater is an event. Theater must be an event. And I really think about that every time I don't have a ton of ideas for plays, but when I do have an idea or inkling, I think, well, is this an event? Like it can't just be like, you don't just flip on a play because you're bored. You go intentionally to see it. And so it really feels like it has to, be a true play and be a thing that you want to experience live and in 3D. And also I think it has to feel worth all that effort. It has to feel like an event. And so it's not even a matter of whether I consider myself a playwright or not. It's do I have a play in me that is the kind of event it would need to be in order to write it, if that makes sense.
It does. We're having this conversation today in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, because somebody may listen to this way in the future, but we're having this conversation in the middle of May of 2020, in the middle of this pandemic.
I hope we're in the middle, Steve.
Well, it'd be lovely if we were winding our way down, but I don't think we are, truthfully. But what I was going to say is that I'm a little, my background's in the theater, and I'm a little concerned for the theater at this moment, because I think it's going to be a while before humans are going to feel comfortable going into a space with a lot of other humans sitting shoulder to shoulder for several hours to watch something, and not fear they're going to catch a deadly disease. So that means that TV and film may take a much more frontal position in the world of entertainment than it ever has before, because I think theater is going to be at risk for a while.
Yeah, I hear that. And what I will say, just on a personal, like just speaking personally as a writer, I do feel at this moment in time, like I am more equipped to make a contribution to TV specifically, but to film as well. I had a writer on my show this past season, Sheila Callahan, who's a brilliant playwright. Oh my God, she's extraordinary. And her brain turns out really like original, brilliant, special play after play. And she's someone who, like, I'm like, I don't want you to stop making plays. And she's also a brilliant TV writer, by the way. She's brilliant in several mediums. And I think right now where I feel most powerful and most able to make, I think my best contribution is in television. When I'm writing a script for film to an extent, but TV specifically, I feel that magic on the page.
Why? What is it about it that does that?
I don't. It's hard to put my finger on or articulate it, but it's almost like it just feels like the kind of creature I am. Like I think a dove has an easier time flying than a penguin, or certainly a lizard. I just feel more comfortable and at home in the environment and the ecosystem of television right now. I think it might be because I was just, eyeballs deep in it for a couple years and, eating, sleeping, breathing my show. And so I got that real crash course by just, I don't know if I can articulate it in any kind of, craft way. I just feel like it's the kind of creature I am at this moment in time.
Well, hard though you may try, you will never, ever be a penguin. That's just never going to happen. I'm sorry. Let's talk about your show. Let's talk about Sorry for Your Loss, which has gotten great reviews, and people seem to be watching it. I assume you're carrying on, yes? When you get back in business.
Well, that's a good question. So Facebook actually is not doing a third season of the show.
Okay.
So I think we are exploring whether there would be a third season somewhere else. So
Sure.
It is a mystery, but I'm also, do I know what a third season would be? Yes. Would I be so thrilled to make one? Absolutely. But I also am so beside myself proud of the 20 episodes we did make. So it's kind of if we get to make a third season, great. If not, we made 20 episodes I'm over the moon about.
It's certainly a very good calling card one way or another, right?
It is.
It helps to propel your career, whatever that will be, into the future, because you've done this thing that did get good marks and it was not a failure at all. It was a success. So yeah, I think that's helpful.
It gave me everything. I mean, yes, to your point, we did well. We did well with critics we did well with our audience. And then just on a personal level, it made me the person I want to be and the writer I want to be. It gave me everything.
So it's correct me if I'm wrong, it's based around death, yes?
Yes.
And so how did you of all people, because you're a light and sunny person, you're not a dark person. How did you come to this idea? How did this come to you?
Well, I don't know if I think I am sunny to be sure, but I think I am also quite I think I'm a little melancholy too. I think I definitely am a faceted weirdo. And I will say the show is about death, but it's also, I don't think you can I don't think you can tell a story about death without telling a story about what it means to be alive
Or
and what it
life.
means
Yeah,
to
sure.
survive this life and be resilient and kind of muscle your way through. And so it's about those things. And I would say as we all are, I'm flawed in many ways. I have my limitations and my shortcomings, but the one thing I've always prided myself in is I feel scrappy and resilient. I feel like I just don't stay down for long.
Well, there you go. That's the Sunny.
Truly, it is sunny, but it's also I kind of think of it a little bit more as like getting like knocked out, like in the ring, where I'm just like sometimes I'm like, well, my nose is bleeding and I may have cracked a rib, but I gotta get back up, because getting back up is what you do.
You're still never going to be a bloody-nosed penguin. I don't care what you say.
I'll take it. Where did it come from? It came from a bunch of places. It was there's if listeners end up watching the pilot, there's a flashback sequence in which the heroine, Lizzie Olsen, whose character's named Lee Shaw, wakes up in the middle of the night. Her husband has not come home. He was out with his brother and he never came home. And she can't get a hold of him on the phone, and it's raining outside and she doesn't know what's going on, and she gets in her car and tries to go find him, and she really thinks he might be dead. And that's just that was just like a night in my life, like that kind of happened shot by shot. And my husband did end up being okay, but I was not okay after that. And it had been a year where a couple people had died, so it kind of felt like the vultures were circling a little bit. I think people, maybe listeners, I think everybody is having that experience right now in this moment of feeling like they are so fragile and vulnerable and in peril. That's how I felt, certainly. And that was haunting me. It's I don't know if you're a Sliding Doors fan at all. I am. I don't know if you're a string theory fan at all. I also am. And I do believe in those infinite universes and infinite possibilities. And I really felt like I bumped close to and almost slipped inside that universe that night where my husband wasn't alive anymore. And this night was haunting me. It like happened in the fall. It was haunting me for several months after. And I kept asking myself, or thinking rather, if my husband was dead, my life would be over, but it couldn't have been over because I would have still been alive. So how can your life be over and how can you still be alive at the same time? Like how do you possibly metabolize that paradox? So the more I thought about this, the more this character came into focus, and the people in her life and her world. And it's interesting because the show in so many ways is a funhouse mirror of my own life. I can kind of, I can look, I can point to everything in the pilot. I can point to so many things in the first season, second season that are from my life, but they're distorted, or it's a truth hidden inside another truth. And then of course, once you bring a writer's room into the mix, and actors and directors and other people sharing, and producers sharing their personal experiences, then other people are bringing their truths too. So it ends up being this interesting collage of a lot of people's truths, but sort of at the heart of that was my truth.
Is it very gratifying for you to have had it's not your life, obviously, but the inspiration to have come from your life? Do you find it very gratifying to watch stories unfold where it came from this? It bloomed out from you?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say, no, it's not autobiographical, but then it wouldn't be fiction if it was autobiographical, right?
Well, most writers are writing about what they've gone through anyway, even if it's total fiction.
Yeah, I would say it's not the events of my life, but I would say it's my heart on the page. It's my veins on the page. It's certainly, I don't think it's a Wikipedia entry of my life at all, but it's who I am and how I see the world.
Well, it's good to know. I think there are lots of shows that have been made in time that are not based on anything from someone's life.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's much more interesting when it does, because that it has a ring of reality to it, a ring of truth to it.
Agreed. I find it really interesting when a work of fiction feels like such a wild departure from reality, but
Mm-hmm.
you do see that writer's beating heart. I think Harry Potter is a great example of, J.K. Rowling, of course, is, inventing Hogwarts and the wizarding world. But at the heart of it, she's an orphan and a new parent. She's wrestling with what it means to be, orphaned, and what it means to be alone, and what it means to kind of make your way through the world and try to figure out who you are without your mom and dad, which I think is, to me, that is at the heart of that story. And even though it's so fantastic in so many ways, there is something so core and true to her at the heart of that story.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. And I mean, that you're correct. That whole big opus is centered on one character, really, or three, I guess, but really one character, and you can tell it's a lot of her.
Yes,
You can tell.
and he finds his father figure in Dumbledore, and then loses his father figure, and really has to have that hero's journey where it's it's so classic Joseph Campbell, right? It's like you're and sort of classic fairy tales. It's like you're orphaned, you finally find your mentor, then you lose your mentor, and then you have to figure out how to be your own hero. I mean, it's which is astounding to me. Obviously a big Harry Potter fan over here.
Obviously. Well, I love it too. All right. So let's talk about staff. I wanted to explore staff writing. You had a staff on Sorry for Your Loss.
2 seasons, yeah.
For 2 seasons. You started obviously writing this by yourself. You didn't write it with a staff. Then you started to write it with a staff. What are the differences? How do you adapt to the staff world? What are those changes in the way that you approach storytelling?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, I learned a lot over 2 seasons of having a staff. I learned, first of all, and I just will say right here, I am so grateful for every person that staffed on my show. We had wonderful writers both seasons, and I feel like down on my knees grateful for every one of them. But I think I learned most of all is how to communicate what I wanted and needed. And I think I didn't even always know what I wanted and needed until, like, for example, it was interesting, like, watching people try to, like, in their scripts, like, mimic like the way I would write a joke or my sensibility. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting, because sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, it's spot on. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this joke feels a little jokey for me. And it's almost like I didn't even realize what I thought was jokey or not jokey until I saw it reflected back on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I used to, when I was, the first season, I think it was harder for me to give that feedback. I've historically been pretty conflict averse, and so I didn't know how to give, I was still kind of figuring out how to give kind, honest, respectful feedback. I didn't know how much was too much or too little. So I was kind of just like figuring out that Goldilocks of it all, like what's too much, what's too little. And I think by the second season and I would say even now, I keep, I think, getting better and better at communicating effectively what's inside my head. And also I think figuring out that balance of, oh, this person didn't write this scene the way I would have, but like, let me take a beat. Let me sit inside this scene. Is this scene just as good as what I would have written? Is it better in some ways? And I think it's being able to kind of like push aside my preconceptions and just being able to like see the scene or see the script for what it is and listen to it. And then see, oh no, is there still a problem at the center of this thing that I need to communicate and that we need to fix together? Or, oh, this thing isn't what I thought it was going to be, but that's okay. So I think I'm kind of talking about a few different constellation points, but it all kind of comes back to just, like, dialing into that groupthink and learning how to have like a real easy flow of information, where everybody, is in my brain, I'm in other people's brains as much as possible.
So a huge part of running a show is figuring out how other people operate and what they're putting onto paper and how that then functions into the whole. Part of your job as a showrunner is to oversee the whole, correct?
I would say it is my job. I would say I truly thought my job was going to be like, I don't know, like 50% writing, 50% people management. I would say it's more like 80-90% people management, like 10-20% writing.
Wow. Did you find that frustrating in any way?
At first, and then I reoriented. I think, for, again, like, I was never a public speaker. I was never I mean, like I told you, when I grew up, I loved reading books and watching movies. I never felt like I was like dynamite in front of other people. And so it was scary to find myself in a job in which that felt like a requirement. Because I was like, I'm not a salesman, I'm not a showman, I'm not these people. How do I do this thing that I'm not? And I just had to, again, like I was saying, I had to redefine what those things meant. For example, like I started thinking of pitching, I started thinking of conversations, I started thinking of everything as storytelling. And it is. Communication is storytelling.
It's all storytelling.
It's all storytelling. And once I thought of everything as storytelling and communication as storytelling, then it didn't seem foreign and out of reach anymore. It just seemed like a different version of what I was already doing. And whereas I used to just dread pitching, now I really like it. I never thought I would like it, but I actually do like it. I used to feel a little bit, uncomfortable in my seat at these production meetings. And now I really like them because it feels like now I used to have one way to tell a story. I would open up a final draft document and I would fill it out. And that was my one way of telling a story. And as a showrunner in these meetings, in these conversations, in these pitches, I have 10, 12 ways of telling a story. And it feels like being an athlete working different muscles. And that's exhilarating.
I've always found pitching frustrating for me. It's the still to this day the weakest part of my game, and I'm not bad at it. I just find it the weakest part of my game. And so you've come into your own on that, where now you're comfortable with it. Was there something that happened to get you through that? Because I think pitching is one of those things that writers in general find difficult. What did you find that has helped you to get over that hurdle?
Yeah. I've had a couple experiences with open writing assignments for features where I had to just go pitch my take. I had to go pitch those 3 acts. Mm-hmm. And there was one, I don't mind talking about this. I think the first open writing assignment for a feature that I took, it's this Lionsgate feature that I'm working on right now. I'm on the rewrite step of it. And I knew I wanted to do it. I knew it was like, it felt like a little bit destined to me. Like it's sort of, it's based on a real story that's, This American Life did an episode about this real life story. Okay. It's essentially, it's these Girl Scouts that were sent to a concentration camp in Japan during World War II and, wow, survived this concentration camp. So it feels like there's a little bit of Sound of Music, a little bit of Dead Poet Society, a little bit of Life is Beautiful. It's an extraordinary story. And I just like, it felt like destiny and kismet. And I had the opportunity to pitch on this thing. And it was sort of like a long time coming. Like they had another writer on it. It was like a whole long story. But like I finally had this opportunity and I felt myself choking. I felt myself dragging my feet and like the producers kept checking in. And I was like, I kept like pushing it off a week, because I was so afraid of the actual going and actually pitching. And I just realized, I was like, oh, if I don't muscle up and do this thing, I'm going to blow it for myself. And as nervous as I am about pitching, like that's going to be a temporary thing. It's going to be like getting your booster shot, or like, it's going to be like, it's a little bit uncomfortable and it's over. But what's going to be uncomfortable forever for me is knowing that in my heart, I felt like I was supposed to write this film and I chickened out and I lost my nerve and I didn't do it like that. Then that would have killed me. So I just like over a weekend, I had been dragging my feet about writing this pitch. And I just like over a weekend, it's like in like a blaze of glory. I wrote it. And then when I delivered the pitch in the room to the studio, I just felt the wind at my sails. Like I felt the universe working alongside me. Mm-hmm. And I think I was the most charismatic or the funniest. No, I think I was okay, but I don't think I was like, I don't know, like I'm trying to think, Meryl Streep meets like Barbara Streisand, girl. Like I wasn't like, a superstar, but what I did have was like this certainty that I was the right writer for this job. I just knew it. I just knew that I was the right person.
Did you, when you pitched, did you feel like you were in a zone that you were?
I did. It did feel like I was in a zone, and I felt like I was in a zone because I 100% believed that I was supposed to write this movie and that this thing was mine.
And how well at that moment did you feel like you knew the story backwards and forwards, inside and out?
Yeah, like I had my notes in front of me, but I practiced it like, I don't know, 20, 30 times. So like I have a pretty good memory. It's gotten better because I do a lot of like dancing on the side and like amateur dancing, like dance classes, and learning choreography has really helped my memory a lot. So I'm a lot,
Why?
I think it activates that part of the brain. It's sort of in the memory center of your brain, like knowing choreography in like a really like, physical way. I think it helps you, at least it helped me, memorize words and language and like similarly like a physical. I don't forget stuff. Like
You're the first person I've ever heard say that dancing and choreography help them to memorize other things.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's very interesting. I get it with the dancing because you've got to remember this step goes before that step, and so on and so on. So I get that, but it's interesting that has helped you to remember pitches. I mean, that's things people can think about as maybe something to help them.
Yeah, it might not be a complete one-to-one. I have no like, I have no clinical study to back me up on this, but like it's worked for me. Anyway, but that's what helped me is, and then kind of from there, just kind of pitch by pitch, I think the ones that are successful, and I don't take too many shots with open writing assignments. Like I kind of like, I only go for something if I really like in that same way, and like in my bones, I believe I am the right writer for this project.
Right.
But in the room when I go and pitch on these things, I always feel that. When I do go and pitch something, I feel like no, I am like, this thing is meant to be. I'm supposed to write this thing. So
and that was something that you felt deep down. It wasn't something you manufactured. You felt it.
Yeah, I felt it. I did feel it.
I think that's important.
It is. And I'm not the right writer for a lot of things. I truly, I don't think nobody is. I think most people aren't one size fits all, but I think every once in a while something comes along and it does feel like destiny. Like, no.
Have you ever met or read a writer who would be perfect for all genres? No, they don't exist.
No. And I think there's some people that are maybe more, is it chameleonic? Is that the adjective? More chameleons than I am.
They're more adaptive to things. There are people that are like that.
Yeah. And those people I think can sometimes be a little bit journeymen. They'll go from like thing to thing. But I sometimes think that person, I mean, everyone's got their cross to bear, their thing to work on. I think that sometimes when someone is more of a chameleon, I think when it comes to their own voice, they sometimes have they can be great at like mimicking and bringing to life other people's voices. But sometimes when it comes to their own voice, they can struggle with having that pop off the page.
So let's talk for a moment about adapting things, which is a little bit different of a skill set than coming up with something whole cloth from nowhere.
It is.
What did you have a facility for adaptation before you started to adapt things? Did you already feel like you could do that? Or what did you do to become an adapter?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think it comes back to having great taste. Like it's a weird thing to say about yourself, but I do think, I think I have a good palate when it comes to storytelling.
Well, you trust what it is, correct me if I'm wrong. Sure. You trust your taste. It's a trust issue. You don't question your taste too much. You go, yeah, this is something I like and can work on, right? I do. And so when it comes to adaptation, I think what it is it's looking at the project, be it a book, a podcast, and whatever, and seeing what sings about it. It's there's a couple things. It's seeing like, oh, this is the money. Like this is the thing that makes the thing so special. Like for example, like in the Hunger Games, it's like, how are you, like that's what makes it so, it's that great heroine, it's that great world, and it's that great battle royale at the center. Like that's the money. Mm-hmm. And then I think you look at okay, well, the next questions I ask myself are, what's not working for me if it's a book? What's not working for me in the book? Like, is it pacing? Do I love this lead character, but is everyone else kind of feeling flat maybe? Am I murky on things? I just ask myself, like, just like as a book review, like what critiques I have. And then in looking at adapting a book, let's say, to the screen,
maybe the book isn't first person and it's very interior and it's very quiet, which works great as a book. No problems there.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to adapting it, I can't connect. I'm not going to be able to connect in that interior way. So I want to find a way to make that interior exterior. I want to find a way to make that quiet, more propulsive and electric and dynamic. So I think it's asking myself those questions. And then look, for the most part, these books that are open writing assignments have producers attached, pod studios, some combination of those. And so then it's kind of going and talking to those potential partners and asking, well, what do you love about this thing? What for you is non-negotiable? What would break your heart if you didn't see this thing on screen? And what do you feel is, and I've worked on some adaptations where they're like, honestly, Kit, the log line, it's the premise, that's what we want, everything else can go. And I've worked on some where it's like, oh, we'd really love to see these scenes. If there's a way of bringing these scenes to your adaptation, that would be great. Because I've adapted both in film and TV at this point. And so it's kind of having all that information in my brain, both my own personal take on my own diagnosis, and then also my teammates, those producing partners, what their diagnosis is. And then from there, coming up with a take that I feel really balances all that.
Well, one of the things that I certainly learned at UCLA was that when it comes to adaptation, the underlying material is actually not important to what the finished piece should be. But that can change too. It depends. So J.K. Rowling, going back to her, she insisted that the movies reflect the books. But there are lots of examples of finished movies and TV shows that don't reflect the underlying book at all.
Agreed. And sometimes that's the best thing for it. Sometimes the best thing for that project is to divert, to your point.
So I'm reasonably well known for having adapted one famous public domain book called The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I can tell you, if you've ever read that book, there's no plot. There are no women. There's no love story. So all that had to be concocted whole cloth out of nowhere. And that's what happens when you adapt things sometimes, is you've got to concoct. Do you find that there's pressure on you to stick closer to the underlying work, or do they let you go? Now, you were just saying a moment ago that you've had it kind of both ways.
It depends on the project, on the stage in the process. There was a project in which my first stab at an outline diverted a lot more, and the suits came back and they were like, oh no, we missed these aspects of it. Like, we went too far away from those things. And they were right. I heard them, they were right. And so it wasn't about going back and like cutting and pasting parts of this work into this FDX format document. But what it was is kind of like thinking holistically about like, okay, you missed you miss having this feeling. You didn't, like, you read this book and you had these feelings and it made you think these things.
Right.
And you're reading this outline, you're not feeling those feelings and having those things. And so it's not, in some cases it was like, oh yeah, you missed that specific scene. I'll go put that specific scene from the book back into this thing. But then there was also just some like, oh, I miss it. Well, I won't talk at school too much, but it's funny. And I went back and read the book and I'm like, oh, I'm actually, with regards to one note in particular, I'm not even sure the thing they were talking about was like even in the book. I think it was just how they remembered reading the book or how they thought of the book.
Absolutely.
Or maybe we had different reads. There's so many variables at play. But kind of a moot point. The fallout of it is I heard them, they were right, and I think what the direction they wanted the outline to go in, ultimately I think made it so much better. I mean, and I think that's just that's kind of one of the most important skills you can have as a writer, in my opinion, is just like that well calibrated tuning fork inside you that hums when you hear a note that's good and right, and then being able to act on that.
All right, this is an important question because I think everybody deals with it, and that is notes, getting notes, taking notes. What's your philosophy on note taking from executives, whether you respect them or not? What is your philosophy on notes?
Yeah, I had a show running partner this past my second season, Eitan Frankel, who he took notes like a dream. Like I'd never seen anybody take notes as gracefully as he did before. I learned a lot from him. And the thing I really learned being with him is when he'd hear a note, he would just ask more questions about the note.
Thank you.
He would just keep asking questions. And I think I'd only ever seen or heard or have, or like when I was, and I didn't even realize this, but until I saw a different version of how to do this. I think I just seen like, cool, taking the notes, hearing it. Maybe if you like completely don't understand, asking for clarification, but then just kind of like receiving them and then going back, closing the door and be like, what are we going to do about these notes? And he would just ask and pitch and spitball and just kind of like almost like looking at the note as a door and then figuring out how to open that door and see what's on the other side of the door. So by the end of the conversation, and the conversations maybe weren't, they were maybe longer than the ones I'd had, not crazy long, but by the end of the conversation, you ask enough questions and you ask the right questions and you fully understand where the note comes from, and then you're not addressing it in a surface way, because sometimes people give surface notes, and sometimes, I mean, like, there's that, I'm sure you've heard this, I've heard it a million times, the note behind the note. You ask enough questions, not only do you understand the note behind the note, but you understand all the possibilities of how to address it in a way that could both satisfy the person giving the note and satisfy you. You know?
That's so key. And please thank Eitan for saying that, because I actually have been teaching for years now that when you have novice writers, frequently they're tying their own personality and ego into the work that they're turning out. And when someone gives them a note on it, their ego gets in the way and they say, how dare you attack me? They take it personally. And I've been teaching for years that the best way to take notes is to take the notes. Somebody has seen something that they had a problem with, they disagreed with, they bumped into, whatever it is. And the best way to handle notes is to ask questions. And you've just said that. That's what Eitan does. That is the best way to handle notes, I think, is to say, well, if this happens, then that'll happen. How do we solve that? And it's a questioning, it's a detective process in a sense.
Yes. And by the way, it's how I believe notes should be primarily given as well. Like I'm teaching now as well. And I, as much as possible, I mean, I don't think it can be completely Socratic 100% of the time, but I like to ask, okay, what do you want me to feel? Like, what do you want me to think about this character? What do you want me to, this is how I interpreted the moment. Is this how you want me to interpret the moment? And sometimes the author's like, yes. And I'm like, cool, great. Then you've communicated this effectively. And they're like, oh, no. This wants to be a dark comedy. And I think you're reading like a sob story. I'm like, okay, well then let's look at and see. I don't think I have all the mileposts I need to know that it's a dark comedy. I don't think I have the lens. I think you need to give me a lens to help me understand the tone, the genre you want, like whatever.
Sure. Well, frequently people are not on the same page, and you got to get on the same page when you're in a collaborative environment. All right. So I'm going to ask you a question I ask lots of people.
Cool.
You're either going to have an answer or it will befuddle you a little, and that's fine. What for you makes a good story good?
Yes, a few things. I want to feel that there's something original about it. I want to feel, it doesn't have to be like, oh, I've never ever seen like lizard robots like on Mars before. Like I don't, and probably I'm sure there's like a bunch of like Pulp Fiction from the 50s.
Like there's lots of lizard robots on Mars. Trust me.
But I want to feel something original and specific about it. And I want to feel something emotional. I want to feel like, oh man, this made me feel a feeling I haven't felt in a long time, or it makes me examine a feeling in a new way.
It's on a gut level. It's all about passion.
Yeah, it's original, emotional, and then there's this X factor where like some things just pop off the page and they just feel like they've got a beating heart. Like some scripts and stories just feel alive. And if something feels emotional and original and alive, can it have like a weird, messy third act? Can it have like a disappointing B story? Like, yeah, and do I want those things fixed? Of course I do. I would love it if something was emotional and original and alive and kind of flawless. That's the dream, obviously. But I forgive faults if something checks off those boxes for me.
So part of the process of telling a story for the screen or for the stage is that you ultimately have to then produce it in a form where actors are acting in it and directors are directing it, and costumes and sets and so on. Have you have you witnessed firsthand where something was just really good for you on paper and it got wrecked in production, and vice versa, where something was not so strong on paper but got plussed big time in production and suddenly became alive for you?
Yeah, you mean on my show specifically?
Either your show or elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, on my show, I don't know if it was ever like,
And I'm not looking for you to expose an example. I'm just saying.
I would never. No, but
Yeah.
but I don't know if it was ever as extreme as you're talking about. But I do think certainly sometimes things like I anticipated, like, oh, that's gonna be really emotional. It's falling flat, and honestly, it's my job to not only work on to rewrite it and to craft and make sure that it sings, but also to work with the actors to make sure that they understand. Because I think a lot of it, to my earlier point, is about communicating with them and making sure that that what I was envisioning, that they're understanding, and if they're not, then we just talk and talk until we come to a place where everyone understands. But the reverse is true. Sometimes a line to me was just like, oh, whatever, it's just a line, and then Lizzie Olsen delivers it. I'm like, holy moly,
Yeah.
that was just like a utilitarian, like throwaway line. And now it's one of my favorite moments in the season because of how you delivered it, what you saw in it, or what you felt.
So you know, I've written dozens of cartoons for kids, and one of the things that's a truism about it is you write stuff and you write it fast for animation for kids, and you think, okay, well, that was kind of not that great or fluffy, or just, you know, I could have, if I had a little more time, whatever the reason is. And then you hand it over to these incredible voice actors, and suddenly the thing just pops, and you go, where'd that come from? It's all about that delivery, that performance. That's what makes a star, is they're giving you something that takes it to another level. Isn't that true?
100%. I think it's what makes a star, and it's also what makes an actor the correct fit for a writer, and vice versa. I mean, you look at like a Joss Whedon and a Sarah Michelle Gellar on a Buffy, or a Kerry Washington, a Shonda Rhimes on Scandal. It's like that creator and that star, they were the right fit for each other. And I do think Lizzie and I, on Sorry for Your Loss, I think we were the right fits for each other. I think I was the right fit, and me and my team were the right fit for our actors. I think I'm really proud of what we were able to give them, and I'm so grateful for what they were able to give us.
Well, clearly there has to be a certain chemistry that works, or it won't work. And so that's, you know, when that happens and it's beautiful, it's like kismet. It's like what your folks did with Cheers. I mean, that was the right fit.
Yes, 100%.
Same thing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, believe it or not, we've been talking for almost an hour.
How is that possible?
It is. It's possible. It's so much fun to do this. So all right. So in all of your experiences, do you have a quirky, offbeat, weird, strange, or just plain funny story that you can share?
I do. I was thinking about this, and I think enough time has passed that I can share this story. I think it's okay. So it was the first season of Sorry for Your Loss. I'll try to tell a story in the most economic way possible. We had an audition for a member, a guest cast member that ended up coming back for several episodes. And this character, for people that don't know, when you audition somebody, you print off sides for them. It's either parts of the script that exist. Sometimes if you haven't written the script yet, you'll write, scenes just for the audition. But we had a script. We had a script where this character was going to, be featured prominently, and you had to pick which scenes this person's going to read. So it was the callbacks. The callbacks were going to be, it's a casting session, so all the producers were going to be there in person with these, I would say 5 or 6 actresses who were coming in to read for this role, and we'd given the directive to we're like, have it be her, like, her first scene and her, like, and scene 15 and her last scene. And so what happened was, so I'll tell it this way. So the first actress comes in and she does the first 2 scenes and they're great. And then she's like, oh, can I like prepare for the last scene? And we're all like, yeah, sure. And she puts on these, her headphones and like listens to music and starts crying, and then takes off the headphones and then it starts crying. And what we realized is we thought that we were telling casting to the last scene with dialogue. But casting had thought we meant the last scene she was in, which is actually a silent scene where she just cries. So rather than getting the last scene with dialogue, which is what we thought we were asking for, we had actually asked these 6 actresses to just like come in and cry, basically. and we're all kind of like stunned, and we're like, oh, that was wonderful, thank you so much. She leaves, and we just the other producers and we just turned to each other like, what are we gonna do? And I can say this. It's James Ponsoldt, who's our producing director, who directed several episodes of the show and was instrumental in the show. He was like, well, look, all these actresses out there prepared. They prepared that scene where she just cries.
Right.
I think out of respect, we should just let them do it. And so we just had these women come in and just like cry for us, and it was very awkward. They were game as hell. Like, they were all so professional and so game, but I was like dying inside. I was like, oh no, like, do they think I'm manipulative? Do they think we're like just like sadistic? Like, this feels crazy. But we ended up getting there was a lot of great actresses came in. One of them, obviously, we hired, and then someone else who was great, we ended up casting a different role that season, and she was wonderful in that role. So it all worked out, but I was just like horrified that I just like asked all these professionals to just come in and like sob for me for like 5 minutes. That's it.
Well, you didn't ask them to come and take their clothes off, so.
Yes, I'm sure each one of them had that was like.
Sure.
They probably don't even remember, honestly. And on the spectrum of like awkward auditions, we were respectful and kind. Like, they probably don't even remember that audition.
I'd be willing to bet you, if you asked them, that the majority of them thought it was a great task, a great challenge to come in and cry.
I'm in touch with 2 of them, the 2 that we ended up casting that season in various roles. I can go ahead and I can ask them. I can definitely send them an email.
And I'll also bet you that it's the first and only time they've ever had that happen, where they were told to come in and audition, and their audition was, you're going to cry.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the first 2 scenes they got to speak, and so there was dialogue leading up to that moment, but yeah, that was certainly, I mean, talk about communication being the watchword. That was a real lesson in being from that moment on. I would double check, and I was like abundantly clear. I'm like, it's these sides. It's these specific sides where these actors will speak. And I would also be very, very clear. Like, for example, if there's like a kiss, like in the scene itself, I would like have them cut it off before the kiss, or I would leave the stage directions, or I'd ask whoever was running the audition, be the casting director or the director, if the director was there, to be very specific that we weren't expecting, or nor do we want there to be a kiss in the audition. I end up like that experience certainly taught me to almost what's the word, like Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law callbacks. I'm just like, what could go wrong? What could go wrong?
Well,
how can we make it not go wrong?
Well, may you have a long career in which there's more than one of these incidents in your career where you think they're going to do something, but they do something else. And I think that'll be a great thing. Last question for you, Kit. All right. So do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you can lend to those who are just trying to break into the business, or maybe somebody's in a little bit, but trying to get to that next level?
I do. This is sort of like my go-to advice right now, and I feel wildly confident about it. Like, I've gotten great feedback on this advice. If you have a listener that like has a bad experience, you have to let me know. But I thus far, I feel like my batting average is very good with this advice, which is when you meet somebody and you get their email and you make a connection, my advice is to like make a real human connection with them that has nothing to do with business industry stuff or like your career as a writer. Like, for example, let's say you meet at a party and you talk about gardening. I would just like truly focus those emails on like gardening. Be like, oh my God, I planted like 8 tomato plants. What am I going to do with all these tomatoes? Like, just essentially just like you do with friends. Like, write emails to, and it doesn't have to be like, it would be overly personal or familiar. You can still be like, respect distance and treat someone like an acquaintance versus like a best friend. But I really believe in the power of like finding very like human things to connect to people about. That's like, and just making friends versus networking. Because what happens is I'll paint you, I'll pitch you two different scenarios. Okay. Scenario one is I meet someone at a party, and let's say it is the gardening thing. And then they like follow up with me like every, like, I don't know, like month or few months. And it's always like, hey, like, did you read my script, or are you staffing? Like, it's all like essentially asking if
business. It's all business
stuff for them. And I'm like, yikes, we just met and you're not. And like, whereas I would of course read a script for a friend, it feels like a lot to ask me, and it feels, and I feel like used, versus if we legitimately, if someone just like, it's like, oh, hey, Kit, I just found this nursery. They're dynamite. Oh my God, I've never had better fresh dill in my life. Like, I love this place. They're so helpful. Or, hey, I finally figured out how to keep the squirrels out of my garden. How are you doing? How's your script going? I mean, you can talk about industry stuff, but just having like the focus be like the specific connection you guys made. And then a year goes by and they're like, hey, Kit, like, totally, like, whatever, I don't know what your time is like or your inclination is like, but I have a script. I've been like working my ass off on it. I feel like it's really good. I love your lens. I love your taste. Like, if you have time, like, would you consider reading it? If not, totally fine. I'm like 1,000 times more likely to want to read that script and help that person because we're friends, because we have a human connection and we're friends. And so I think this idea of networking, I think, is honestly a very emotionally unintelligent idea, because I don't think, especially if you have, to your point, if you have low or low-ish status in Hollywood, if you are either breaking in or trying to break in, you don't have, I'm not like, oh fuck, I gotta read that person's script because they're like, it's like really important for my career and it's like a career priority. So you don't have that going for you, but what you do going for you is, I want to read the script. I want to help you because we're two humans that like each other a lot and have formed like a connection over a period of time. So that's right. I think that advice people have been taking and it's been going pretty well for them. So
I think that's the first time I've heard anybody say it at all like that. And I think that's a very wise piece of advice. Of course, I think I would put the caveat on it that you alluded to earlier, is that it can't become stalkerish. That's not a good thing. So it has to be very businesslike and professional, yet friendly at the same time. No. And you're talking on a personal level about things that you connected with when you met.
Yes. And I would say like, yes to all that. And like those emails are brief. Like truly it's like you're sending a link to that nursery and asking how things are going. Like it's like a 2-3 line email. And then look, it's a little bit like, I think you let the person who has more power than you kind of lead the dance. Yeah. If that person writes back, like if their response is very brief, you're like, cool. You give it a couple months, you send another email. If they never respond, maybe one more email, but like truly like, you let them lead and you see what they're giving you. Meanwhile, if they write you back a couple paragraphs, you're like, oh, okay, maybe next time I write you back a couple paragraphs. Like if they ask you questions, you can answer them in a meaningful way. I think it's not stalkerish at all to like reach out once or twice, especially if it's from a place of generosity.
Well, you don't want to have somebody, you don't want to say to somebody, yeah, we're talking to you about tomatoes, and then they send you an email and say, I'm standing in your garden right now. That would not be a good thing. That would be terrible. But that's not likely to happen because you've met them at a social event. And therefore, and I think
you're really, I'm sorry, I didn't cut you off.
I was just going to say that there's a vetting process that you've gone through just to have gone to the same social event.
Yes, you're vetting, and then that opening salvo, those first few back and forths are truly like testing the waters. You're seeing like if this person does want to have some kind of like low-key communication. Like it is, I mean, I compare everything in Hollywood to dating, but it is dating. It's like, oh, did this date, and I'm not saying it's romantic or sexual at all, but what I'm saying is there's an energy and a chemistry. It's like, oh, absolutely. Does this person respond? And by the way, like I have people that have like, I would argue like maybe like less status than me, but like I've reached out to once, twice, like, and they kind of never respond. And I'm like, cool. Like I think you, to my point about making friends, you just test it out. Like you test it out in a very low key way, and you see what the other person is giving back to you. And if it feels like there's something nice going on, you continue it.
At the end of the day, everything that you do in the business is about relationships. And so if you don't have that established relationship, it's going to be very difficult. It is like it's like marriages, plural. That is to say, when you're working with people on staff or you're working with production people, you're married to them for a period of time, and sometimes you're seeing them more than you're seeing your family or your spouse or whoever. And so, yes, you have to have that connection. And I think that's very, very wise advice, that the connection is almost more important than the work that you do, that you're going to show, though that has to be there too.
Yes. And I think it's emotional intelligence. It's thinking, it's asking yourself, what do I want from a stranger? Like, if a stranger sent me this, how would I feel? And just kind of a sort of golden ruling your communication.
It's being human. It's what you said. It's empathy and being human. That's what it really is.
All good things.
Kit Steinkellner, this has just been a spectacular show. I've had so much fun listening to all of your stories and all the things you're going through, and I think you're going to continue on, and we're going to see a lot more of you. So
well, that's very kind. This has been such a delight. I'm so honored to have been asked to
the honor's mine.
Mutual honor, a mutual honor society.
I'm going to send you my gardening recipes.
Oh,
I don't have any.
I don't either. I'm trying to get into it, but I haven't yet. I mean, again, it's like everything is more complicated right now. It's like I'm like, how am I going to get chicken wire and not from Amazon?
You can go to your Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, and go in there. You just got to be careful. That's all.
Yeah. It's my next project for sure. Anyway.
Well, thank you so much. Have a grand day. I'm so appreciative of you coming on the show.
Oh, it's been a delight. Thank you so much. And you have a grand day as well.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.